Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. COVID-19 vaccination protects you and those around you. When communities are vaccinated, fewer people get sick. Community immunity begins with each one of us. All right, so one of the most frequent calls we have been getting lately has been about fall armyworm. This is a caterpillar that overwinters in the southern states where it's warm, and then through the summer they'll fly north or they'll get caught on storms or breezes that bring them up into our region. Now, what we're seeing this year is an outbreak. And an outbreak is simply a year where we have a high concentration of the population. So there's just a whole lot of them. Unfortunately, this has caused some damage to our hay fields, our pasture fields, and to people's lawns. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about what the fall armyworm is, how to manage it, and if you have significant decline in your grassy area, what you can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, not to overplay it, but that fall armyworm has caught Ohio by storm. Like, people are just, what is this thing that eating up my pasture, my alfalfa crop, my lawn? It is just everywhere. A pest that is not an uncommon pest, but it is uncommon for the area, and rightly so, because of environmental circumstances that have brought it this way, making it maybe not a novel pest, but a novel pest to us that is really just catching everybody by surprise.
Yeah, and like Dan said, this isn't something that we don't have. It's not new to the area. It's just new that it's here in such high numbers. I mean, this is something that farmers have been, struggling against for a long time, but normally it doesn't cause as much of an impact as it's been causing. And there are some pasture fields that are just completely brown right now because of this insect. And thankfully, the insect doesn't typically eat all the way down to the crown of the grass plant, so it should recover. But the problem is we are still expecting another hatch. So there could be one more generation of this insect between now and our next freeze. They will all die when it freezes. But waiting for that to happen, we could still see some more destruction from this insect between now and then. So what we're recommending is to confirm that this is what your problem is, that it's not something else, some environmental condition, drought, a changing waterway, things like that have caused the damage to your lawn or your grass fields. One of the ways you can verify is by pouring some soapy water onto the turf to see if any of the caterpillars kind of climb up to the surface after that. So what you do is you go out and you can either run your hand through the grass and rub it around and see how many fall out. And if you have 3 to 4 caterpillars in a square foot, then it's typically considered the economic threshold for treatment. So we do recommend that if you have 4 caterpillars that are 1/4 inch long or larger, you should be treating that area.
Yeah, so let me just kind of back up a little bit. So this fall armyworm, it's a much bigger pest in the south than it is around here. Some of the ways that it was kind of brought up here, at least the way that researchers are talking about it, was we've had somewhat of an abnormally warm summer, but we've also had a lot of hurricanes and a lot of winds and a lot of late season hurricanes. And these winds have been slowly pushing these moths up north. They don't like the cold, as Karen was saying, and it has been slightly warmer than usual. So they've been kind of establishing themselves further and further north. And because it's been a little warmer, they've been able to get a few extra life cycles in there to where we have a lot more than we're used to seeing. And there are fields that have really bad infestation. Karen was saying 3 worms per square foot. When it's a really bad infestation, I think I have counted 10 to 15 worms per square foot. Like it doesn't take a lot of work to find these guys. They are green on the belly and brown up top. Does that sound right, Karen?
Yeah.
And they're called fall armyworms because they just basically take over. They just march and eat and just keep going, and they can just annihilate a patch of forage, whether it's grasses or alfalfa. They just love alfalfa, and I've seen alfalfa fields just get eaten up 3 to 4 days, major damage, and they need to be taken care of, as Karen was saying, because these things have 4 to 5 week life cycle. They don't reproduce all at once, so where you get these large flushes, they're slightly staggered, which just kind of means continuous damage. But we are expecting another life cycle before that first freeze comes in.
Now, the egg masses, you can identify them. They typically are going to try to lay them on your house, or any light colored surface is what they usually go for. They look kind of like a soft, whitish gray mass, but they're kind of fuzzy. So when you find a egg mass that's a little fuzzy, you can scrape that off, especially if it's on your house or something like that, and that's going to reduce the number of eggs that can hatch. But those eggs are going to hatch into these little caterpillars, and they start off super teeny tiny things, just like all babies do. And the larval stage, or the caterpillars, are going to be about 14 to 22 days. But it's only those last 3 to 4 days where you really start to see damage from them, because they're those voracious teenagers that never stop eating. So when you're looking at these caterpillars, when they're little tiny ones, is when you really need to start treating them. So you have to go out and scout for them. And we're recommending that you actually go out and scout 2 to 3 times a week, depending on the value of your crop and the proximity of damage that's been observed. And your crop can be your lawn.
Yes, it can. And there are many things you can actually use to get control of these guys. And it's nothing. It's not that necessarily that they're hard to kill, but like Karen was saying, they also have to be in contact with products. Many products are going to be contact kills, so there has to be some kind of like they can't be on the ground. You can't mow, have a bunch of debris on top, and then spray something. You're going to have to maybe mow, maybe bale. I've heard of cases where you went to an alfalfa field. I was there, and they were just everywhere. And the recommendation from looking at the specific situation was mow it off, bale it up to kind of clean up the area, wrap as bales. One way to contain this would be to wrap it up, and then that heat would hopefully cook those guys and kill them. But another thought was, if you don't wrap your bales, just don't put it close to another crop. Don't put it in another clean pasture. Just get it out of the way. Maybe at the edge of the woods or something, away from everything, so that they don't come back and infest right away. But the baling mechanically removes some, and then have a clean ability to reach the ones that are still crawling around in the alfalfa field in this case, and give it a spray. Now, this was late in August, so we would expect another life cycle before a hard freeze. And the recommendation was to let the alfalfa regrow and give it a second spray early in October, so that the alfalfa plant will stay healthy and will put photosynthates/sugars into the root so that it can overwinter well, because this was the first year for that alfalfa planting, and we don't want to see it thinning out in just the first year, especially going from the first year to the second year. Those plants, you want to get a good 4 or 5 years worth of alfalfa from, just to make the money worthwhile. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you're not over harvesting, especially going into the winter.
Right, and these caterpillars might be over harvesting for you. And so that's why we're recommending that you scout and that you treat. And there are a couple different ways to treat depending on your circumstances and the size of your caterpillars that you're dealing with. But before we get into that, I did want to mention, for those of you who are planting crops for harvest next spring, let's say you're putting your strawberries out or something like that, these armyworms could potentially put your newly planted crop at risk. So you do want to make sure that anything new that you are putting out, that you are scouting. And for something like that, we're going to recommend to use a product like Spinozid. It's not a broad spectrum pesticide, and so it will affect fewer insects and will leave more of your beneficials behind so that your crops can maintain that natural resistance. Like, for instance, if you're using pyrethrin, often has the negative impact of increasing spider mite populations because you kill off all of the predators that keep spider mites in check, and then you have a spider mite problem, which is actually a lot harder to contain than most insect problems because mites are a bear. So keep that in mind if you are putting a new crop out that you're going to overwinter, that this pest may also impact you.
Yeah, Karen, that's a really good point. We tend to focus on the row crops, corn, beans, alfalfa, and forage grasses, and especially with this fall armyworm issue, I did not consider the fact that if you have some kind of produce that you're growing that you have to get in the fall for spring harvest, that you're going to run into different problems. Yeah, the spider mite thing, that's a really good point. These recommendations are very specific to the crop that you're using. And honestly, just anytime I want to recommend a product, a chemical, I make sure that I understand the entire operation of that landowner, of that farmer, because that's really going to dictate the best thing to use.
Right.
The best kill isn't necessarily the best thing if it's going to really mess up your operation.
Yeah, especially for those who are organic certified.
Oh yeah. I mean that, even that aside, you have to make sure you're able to harvest when you need to harvest. You don't want to put something that would delay your harvest time and then give you either a complete loss or a partial loss because you just didn't read the restrictions enough.
Right.
Even worse, get you in trouble because you didn't read those restrictions enough. So when you're picking out a product, efficacy is important, but restrictions, I would say, are more important even.
Right. Just a quick overview. They feed on over 80 different plant species. They prefer grasses like rye and wheat. They also frequently damage field crops like alfalfa, barley, Bermuda grass, buckwheat, clover, corn, oats, millet, sorghum, sugar beets, Sudan grass, and soybeans. But sometimes they do also injure even apple and peach trees, grapevines, and your strawberries. We do have high enough pressures from these insects that if you're growing any of those, you're going to want to scout as well.
Yeah, and let's talk about corn. Corn is something that is grown from north of us all the way down to Arkansas. Even further down, I just kind of thought Arkansas because I was kind of going down the map at a very specific point. But corn, corn sees fall armyworms frequently, especially in the South. And, we do have a GMO called BT corn that has that BT trait that is supposed to kill moth type borers. One of the things that people were thinking of is we're kind of new to seeing this problem. Now, most people that have alfalfa will typically have corn as well, and they might use that corn for baleage. And then, they're thinking, okay, well, I got these new worms now. They've annihilated my alfalfa field. Are they going to hurt my corn? And I remember talking to one guy, and I asked him, I said, hey, do you have BT corn? At the time, I wasn't really thinking about resistance necessarily, but he's like, I'm not sure. And this would be something that, some of these BT traits could really come into play. Because even though there has been some resistance on certain BT type traits, a lot of times we think of these BT resistant traits happening mainly in things like cutworms, other worms that cause damage in corn, but not necessarily fall armyworms. But it's not unheard of that in other states you might find some resistance to these because, like I said, it's not a new pest. It's just a bad infestation of something that we don't normally see up in this area. So as far as reports from BT resistance for the fall armyworm in the state of Ohio. That doesn't seem to be the case. But if you do see something, yeah, please give us a call. Let us know. And if you see something working really well, that's always great to know as well. Honestly, if you know your corn is BT and you're still having a lot of fall armyworm problems, let us know what kind of corn is it or it is, and we can make sure that we let other people know so that if we have something like this happening again, we could at least educate people on getting a different type of BT trait that might offer more protection. Because will this happen again? Who knows?
Yeah, and we need to be aware of any type of resistance that's developing out there. And, for the farmer who said they didn't know whether or not they had BT corn, that really bothers me, because when you look at those genetically modified crops that have a pesticide built into them, you need to be following the label instructions on those products just like you have a pesticide. There are specific planting regulations. You have to have buffer zones of non-BT corn to help reduce problems that we're talking about right now with resistance. And so if you don't know if you have a corn variety that has that resistance that's been programmed into it, you really need to have this information. This is something you have to pay attention to.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said something. Small farmers don't typically do the refuge rows and things like that, but that is really important. I know the big corn growers, that's something that's just kind of done. And in the smaller farms, it's just kind of forgotten.
But and
you're right, though.
The chemicals that we have available, the tools that we have available, they're important. And, we need to be really focused on rotating our sprays and our fungicides. And each farmer out there who's using this type of crop is part of that network of influencers towards the development of these resistant insects and resistant weeds. So if everybody isn't working together on this, everybody's going to pay the price on this. So if you're a small farmer, and I know a lot of our listeners are small farms, and if you're a new farmer and you have no idea what we're talking about, please reach out to us. And, we're no judgment here. It's just we're trying to encourage everybody to make sure that we are following these rules because they're in place to prevent problems like glyphosate-resistant weeds, like BT-resistant fall armyworm. And BT is a great tool. It's a naturally occurring soil-borne fungus that affects these insects, and it's useful for controlling a lot of our invasive pests like gypsy moth without affecting the other things that we're trying to take care of. We need our beneficial insects, and so we need to focus on the tools that we have and using them appropriately so we can protect our beneficials and keep our nuisance pests from becoming an outbreak like this. So I'm not saying this is what's causing this outbreak. Insects just have natural outbreak seasons. It happens. But I'm going to go ahead and get off of my soapbox, and I'm going to lead right into there are beneficials that can help control fall armyworm. So there are 3 different nematodes that can be used to control fall armyworm that you can purchase and put out in your fields. Now, you have to be in pretty high numbers to help control, but there are some nematodes that will target the pupae. So what's going to come out next spring. So for those of you who are seeing fall armyworms now, know that they're not necessarily pupating in your fields over the winter. That's something that the people in the southern states are going to want to look into because our soils get too cold for this insect in the wintertime. But there are some that you can use in the summertime, like starting in June, July, where we can start putting these nematodes out in the field to especially protect your high-value crops. And I also want to recommend, and hopefully we'll bring it up in time next year, that you put out the traps so that you can monitor when fall armyworm gets here. They're starting to come, like Dan said in the very beginning of the show, earlier and earlier, which means they have more and more generations, which means we're more likely to see more of these larger accumulations of these insects. And so we need to monitor, and you all need to help us stay in the loop by telling us what you're finding.
Yeah, and I was going to say, The sooner that we know this stuff, the faster we can push out the information. We don't only tell the landowners, but we also communicate with the different co-ops. We let them know what's going on. We let them know, hey, make sure you stock up on product X, Y, and Z, giving you some options, giving you something to be able to, giving everybody time to react. The sooner we know, the more time we have to react. The more time you have to react, the more time you have to make a good decision, possibly complete control. So it's just good to communicate with each other. We're all in the same area, and we all need to help each other stay afloat in this tough business of agriculture.
Right. And before we run out of time, speaking of time, just wanted to go over a couple of the different products that are available. I have heard that there are some shortages of certain products, but there are a large variety of things that you can use. For example, Spinozid, I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce this right, but I will try, chlorantraniliprole, adazracetan, pyrethrins, neem oil, methoxbenzoid. Those are all reduced risk insecticides, and I can give these to you in writing. You don't have to interpret my mispronunciations. But there's also BT, like we said, can be used to control the younger larval instars. It doesn't really work too well on big caterpillars. But other things, such as probably ones you're more familiar with, would be cyfluthrin, bifenthrin, carbaryl, malathion, lambda chiothrin. Those also kill fall armyworm, but those are broad spectrum insecticides, and so they can be harmful to your beneficial organisms and lead to those things I talked about, like spider mite outbreaks. So always read and follow the label directions. Make sure you're very aware of your withdrawal time or your harvest interval to make sure that you are not potentially contaminating your hay crop for your cattle feeding this winter. So do read the label. I know we say that all the time. You got to read the label and
yeah,
follow what the label says. As far as if fall armyworm isn't on the label, you can check with your local extension office or find a different product that does have fall armyworm on the label.
That's right. And then there's going to be differences if it's an alfalfa crop, if it's a grass, if it's a pasture or a hay field. There's going to be variations in terms of a harvest restriction versus a grazing restriction, how long you have to keep the animals off. So just understand that, again, just because something works the best doesn't mean it's the best thing for you, especially because of these restrictions. And there are things that have residuals or things that are contact. Know the difference. If you have questions, we'll be happy to kind of guide you through it. There are things that are restricted and there are things that are not restricted. So again, communicate with us and we'll help you navigate through this jungle of products and options that you can use and hopefully make a good decision and a quick decision at that.
Yeah, and we do expect your pasture fields to recover as long as this next outbreak doesn't prevent them from getting some good growth on them between now and November. You will want to just keep your cattle off of those areas and let it grow back, fully get that good root system established before you get into the winter time. If you feel like it's not coming back and we're towards mid-September now. So, 9/15 is typically the day we say, okay, your ideal planting season is now over. We're looking at October quickly approaching, but Timothy is one of those things that you can plant pretty late through mid-October even. Some annual rye can still get established. For lawns, maybe some Kentucky bluegrass you could still get in there, but making sure that you're not having bare soil going into the winter time is really critical. Bare soil is one of the biggest evils of our world. I know that there's a lot of evils in our world right now, but bare soil is definitely a contributor to a lot of those things. So please try to keep your soil covered. If you notice that your grasses are not coming back, reach out to your local extension office and get some guidance on how to get that established. Your conservation district, if you have no-till drill available, getting that in without disturbing the root mass that's already there is also going to help reduce the amount of erosion that could come as a result of losing the grass cover.
Yeah, and the key to seeding, obviously, you have to make sure you're in the right window. But you could be in the perfect window, but if you don't have that good seed to soil contact, you're not going to have any success. So, be diligent, do it right, and you'll be better off, because there's no point in spending money if you're going to take shortcuts and have nothing grow because there was not a good seed to soil contact. So just make sure you're doing it properly. And if you do have questions, let us know, and we'll help you come up with a good plan based on the equipment, the time, and the expertise that you have.
Do you have questions about the COVID-19 vaccination? Do you want to know who can get it, where to get it, or do you have general questions about COVID-19 vaccines? Vaccinate.wv.gov has the info you are looking for. You can also call the West Virginia COVID-19 Vaccine Info Line to talk to a representative and find out more at 1-833-734-0965. Again, that's vaccinate.wv.gov or 1-833-734-0965 to get your COVID-19 vaccination questions answered. This message was brought to you by the WVU Extension Service. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.